What if the New World Order got a new investor, one nobody saw coming? What if Paul Heyman joined WCW while simultaneously owning ECW, sparking an invasion and setting the stage for a career-defining world title match? That's the story we're diving into today using WWE 2K25 Universe mode. Nitro kicked off in true classic nWo fashion, with the villainous alliance strutting confidently down to the ring. At the front was Hogan, leading the charge, with WCW World Champion Kevin Nash right at his side. For weeks, the nWo had been hinting at a dramatic announcement, and now, the moment had finally arrived to find out exactly what it was. Once they were in the ring, Hogan and Nash took center stage on the mic. The crowd was eating it up. The nWo was about to head in a different direction. They didn't give away much, but they teased that a mystery new investor had joined forces with them, someone who was going to change the entire trajectory of the faction. Nobody knew who they were talking about yet, but you could feel it. This wasn't just another name to pad the numbers. This was going to shake WCW to its core, the moment that blew the roof off. The music hit, the crowd turned toward the entranceway, and out stepped Paul Heyman, the owner of ECW, walking onto WCW Monday Nitro. The gasps from the audience told the whole story. This wasn't just a new investor. This was a man from an entirely different world, someone who had been the driving force behind WCW's biggest underground competition. The sheer audacity of Heyman showing up in nWo colors, on Nitro of all places, was completely unprecedented. Right then and there, the fans had to be wondering, what did this mean? Was WCW working with ECW? Was the war between companies taking a strange turn toward an alliance? Whatever it was, the balance of power in wrestling had just shifted in a way no one could have predicted. Heyman wasted no time sharing his views. Stepping through the ropes with that trademark smirk, he took the microphone and addressed the crowd like he'd been running Nitro for years. He dropped the first bombshell. Bischoff had stepped back from his role in WCW management, and in his place, Paul Heyman, now with a vested interest in the company's future. His opening move, a major financial investment in the nWo. But Heyman didn't come out just to celebrate his arrival. He told the fans there was a problem within the group, a distraction holding them back from their true potential. One member, in his words, who had been causing issues behind the scenes and in the ring. There was a brief pause, just long enough for the crowd to wonder if Heyman would name names. And then, without warning, Kevin Nash blindsided Scott Hall with a cheap shot. This was his best friend for life, his tag partner through countless battles. But as they say, money talks. And in that moment, Nash proved he'd cashed in and sold out. The world champion hoisted Hall high and drove him down with a thunderous jackknife powerbomb. Hogan followed up without hesitation, dropping his iconic leg drop across Hall's chest. With Hall lying broken on the mat, they dragged him to the ropes and unceremoniously tossed him out of the ring like a piece of moldy cheese. Heyman stood shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the nWo. The following week on Nitro, Scott Hall walked out alone, a man who looked like he'd lost everything. In his hand, a kendo stick. He wasn't swinging it, but the intent was obvious. With no allies left, he'd have to watch his own back. In the ring, Hall poured his heart out. He berated Nash for the betrayal, reminding him of the years they'd spent side by side, the battles they'd fought together. Hall said he'd given everything to Big Kev, and this was the payback he got. Then he turned his sights on Heyman, claiming he knew exactly why Heyman had targeted him. It went back years, to when Hall no-showed a major ECW pay-per-view, a slight Heyman had clearly never forgotten. Finally, Hall called out to the locker room. Old friends, people he'd helped in the past, anyone who owed him a favor, he asked them to stand with him now. The arena fell into an uneasy silence. Seconds turned into what felt like minutes, but no one came. Hall's expression told the story, a mix of frustration, sadness, and realization. And that's when the nWo appeared on the stage. Nash threw his head back and laughed at his former best friend. Beside him, Hogan and Heyman stood smirking, the picture of pure arrogance. Hall was truly on his own, and everyone knew it. Later in the broadcast, Hall got word he'd been booked in the Nitro main event. On the surface, that was good news. A main event spot meant a great payday, but there was a catch. Hall had no idea who his opponent would be. The only clue came from the network's own advertisements, which billed the match as Scott Hall versus his replacement. The phrasing was deliberate, almost cruel, as if designed to twist the knife. Now the question hanging over the entire night was simple but tantalizing. Who had Heyman and the nWo chosen to fill Hall's spot? Whoever it was, it would be someone they believed could not only replace him, but surpass him. Then the music hit, and the crowd erupted. It was Rob Van Dam. The ECW legend himself had just walked into WCW, cool as ever, soaking in the reaction. And suddenly, everything started to make sense. RVD wasn't just some surprise signing. He was still under contract with Heyman's ECW. This was Heyman's play all along. Use his position in WCW to give his own stars a platform on national television. Smart and calculated. And for Hall, devastating. The man replacing him wasn't just anyone. It was one of the most dynamic talents in wrestling, handpicked by Heyman to make a statement. The main event delivered exactly what the hype promised. A showcase for Rob Van Dam's athleticism and a gritty fight from Scott Hall. The match was packed with high-impact spots, and for all of RVD's flash, it looked like Hall might just pull off the win. After weathering the storm, Hall finally landed the razor's edge in the center of the ring. The crowd was on its feet, but before he could make the cover, Big Daddy Cool slid in from nowhere and cracked Hall across the back with a steel chair. The referee immediately called for the bell, giving Hall the DQ victory, but that was meaningless now. Nash hoisted his former buddy high and planted him with a brutal jackknife. And then, to put the exclamation point on the night, RVD climbed the ropes and delivered a picture-perfect 5-star frog splash. As Hall lay motionless in the ring, Heyman's new alliance stood tall, and WCW Nitro faded to black. The next week on Nitro, Scott Hall was shown backstage in a quiet, low-key moment with Lex Luger. There was no sarcasm this time, just a man trying to make amends. Hall apologized to Luger for his past actions, acknowledging that he hadn't always been the best friend or ally. But things were different now. They had a common enemy in Heyman's nWo, and Hall was trying to build bridges. He told Luger that if the total package ever needed anything, all he had to do was pick up the phone. Hall promised to have Lex's back, if Lex would be willing to return the favor. It wasn't a flashy segment, but it was telling. Hall was a man on an island, and little by little he was trying to find his way back into the good graces of the WCW locker room. Later that night, WCW cameras caught a tense exchange backstage between Randy Savage and Hollywood Hogan. These two had always had a complicated relationship, brothers in arms one minute, bitter rivals the next, and it was clear something was boiling over. Savage, visibly agitated, accused Hogan of keeping him in the dark. He claimed he hadn't even known about Paul Heyman's investment in the nWo until the very night it happened. To Savage, that was more than just bad communication. It was a breach of trust. Then he got to the heart of it. Savage told Hogan he was being stupid. In his eyes, Heyman wasn't here to strengthen the nWo. He was using it as a backdoor for a full-blown ECW invasion of WCW. Hogan tried to calm things down, but Savage wasn't having it. He shook his head, muttered that he wanted no part of this Heyman alliance, and stormed off, leaving Hogan alone with the weight of those words. The main event that night was set. Kevin Nash and Curt Hennig representing the nWo against Lex Luger and Randy Savage. Everyone was already in the ring, waiting for Savage to make his entrance. Then the music hit, and it wasn't the nWo theme. The arena went bananas as the classic Ooh Yeah theme blared through the speakers. Out stepped the Macho Man Randy Savage, dressed not in the black and white, but in his trademark colorful gear, dripping with all the flamboyance and swagger that made him an icon. The crowd instantly understood what they were seeing. Savage wasn't just playing mind games, he meant every word from earlier in the night. The question now was whether this was a symbolic stand, or the official beginning of Savage's break from the group. The match itself was a battle. Nash's size and Hennig's technical skill kept Luger and Savage fighting from underneath, but the tide turned late in the contest. In a moment that felt like vintage WCW, Savage ascended the top rope and came crashing down with his trademark flying Slim Jim elbow on Hennig, sealing the victory for his team. The crowd roared as Luger and Savage stood tall in the ring, a clear statement against the nWo. But the celebration took an unexpected turn when Scott Hall made his way down the aisle. He stepped through the ropes and in a moment of humility, gave the Macho Man a thumbs up, a silent offer to build a bridge between them. Savage didn't even think about it. He flipped Hall off right there in the middle of the ring and walked away without saying a word. Savage might be done with the nWo, but that didn't mean he wanted any alliance with Scott Hall either. The following week on Nitro, Paul Heyman stood in the center of the ring with only a handful of nWo's key lieutenants at his side. He announced the main event for the upcoming sold-out pay-per-view, Kevin Nash defending his WCW World title against his former best friend, Scott Hall. Then, in classic Heyman fashion, he twisted the knife. Looking straight into the camera, he grinned and said, "Good luck with that one, Hall." It was obvious what he meant. The match wouldn't just be against Nash, it would be against the full weight of the nWo corporation. Before the nWo could gloat, the arena lights dimmed and the big screen lit up with a live satellite link. On the screen appeared none other than Ric Flair, representing the WCW Championship Committee. Flair reminded everyone that the purpose of the committee was to protect the prestige of the world title and prevent malpractice in its defenses. As a member of the committee, he was invoking his right to amend the main event it sold out. The match between Nash and Hall would still happen, but now it would take place inside a solid steel cage. It was a shift in the power dynamic, and for the first time in weeks, the nWo's smirks faded just a little. Back in the arena, the camera cut to Kevin Kevin Nash in the ring, visibly seething at Flair's announcement. The world champ paced back and forth, clearly unhappy about the idea of being locked in a cage with his former best friend. That's when Scott Hall stepped out onto the stage, microphone in hand, and a big, sarcastic grin plastered across his face. Hall said that while he appreciated Flair's attempt to even the odds, he wasn't stupid. He knew the nWo would still try to cut corners, especially with Heyman pulling the strings. Then he dropped his own twist. He had a backup plan for Sold Out. Hall didn't give details, just promised that when the time came, he'd have someone watching his back to make sure the cage actually meant something. The night had finally arrived. Sold Out. Weeks of tension and mind games had all led to this. The cage began its slow descent from the rafters, the steel surrounding the ring like a fortress. The fans were on their feet, the noise deafening as the door was locked. There would be no escape, no outside interference, at least in theory. From the opening bell, it was exactly what you'd expect from two men with so much history. This wasn't a technical masterpiece. It was a fight. Heavy strikes, big slams, and every inch of the cage being used as a weapon. The grandest prize in WCW hung in the balance, and both men were willing to go through hell to leave with it. Late in the match, Hall weathered everything Nash could throw at him. Then, in a surge of adrenaline, he planted the champion with a devastating razor's edge in the center of the ring. The crowd roared as Hall began to scale the cage, each step bringing him closer to freedom, closer to the biggest win of his career. Hall reached the very top and paused. He looked down at Nash, the man who had once been his brother. You could almost see the question in Hall's eyes. Did he truly have it in him to end this chapter and claim his first world title? That single moment of hesitation was all it took. From the aisle, Hollywood Hogan appeared, steel chair in hand. With the accuracy of a major league pitcher, Hogan hurled the chair upward. It clipped Hall perfectly, sending him crashing backward off the cage and down to the canvas with a sickening thud. The crowd's cheers turned to gasps, and just like that, the tide had turned. Nash staggered back to his feet, shaking off the fall of his opponent. With methodical precision, he hoisted Hall into the air and drove him down with a crushing jackknife. The crowd knew what was coming. Nash was about to retain the world title, and then the lights went out. In the darkness, you could just make out the silhouette of a figure scaling the cage. The arena buzzed, fans straining to see who it was. When the lights snapped back on, the mystery was over. It was Sting. The icon stood right behind Nash, silent as a shadow. Before the champion could even turn, Sting struck, planting him with a thunderous scorpion death drop. In one fluid motion, Sting slipped out of the cage, disappearing into the night like a panther on the prowl. Hall, still battered, pulled himself up. With the crowd rallying, he mustered the strength to hoist Nash again, delivering one more razor's edge. Limping to the cage door, he signaled to the referee, who swung it open. Hall stepped through and hit the floor, securing the victory, and with it, his very first WCW World Championship. As the bell rang and the announcement was made, Hall burst into tears, clutching the WCW World Championship in his arms. It was a moment years in the making, battered and exhausted, but victorious. He cradled the championship against his chest like a newborn. Scott Hall, alone but finally on top of the mountain.